Normally the moderator should be at least have a timekeeper, right? But the presentation so far is so interesting that I haven't even looked at my time, right? I'm just sitting, listening, just like you. So I know you have even more questions now, about us starting at the top, in terms of self-mobilization and everything. But just keep it for the discussion, which will follow shortly. Next we have Ms. Ayana McCalman, the involvement and inclusion of young women in decision making.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to say that I've been truly inspired so far by the two presentations. Thank you, Dr. Eiffel. Thank you, Nora. And I believe that what I'm going to say actually is going to build on a lot of the concepts and the ideas that have already been shared. And I'll also help you moderate by keeping time to 5 minutes. So we've all heard this mantra. I think it's actually even recorded on the Youth Council info sheet that youths are the future. However, I believe that is a myth. We need to get to the point, and I believe that youths can actually change the future. We've just heard a good presentation from Nora about self-mobilization. So I believe we need to get to the understanding, busting this myth that youths are the future, and get to the understanding that youths can change the future. But first, let me begin with a personal story. I became a trustee of an international charitable organization called Council for World Mission at age 26. I was a trustee and a director of the board. This was an organization that serves member churches and communities all around the world. At age 29, I then became a deputy moderator of that organization. Some of the experiences I'm going to share about the inclusion, particularly of young women, of course, comes directly from that experience. But first I want to put, again, what I'm going to share about the inclusion of young women into a context for Guyana as well. We've heard that a figure has been given to us that young people are 1/5 of the global population. Some of the figures being given here that we now have reached 7 billion people, 1.8 billion of those are young people. 90%, it is said, live in developing countries. In Guyana, I was looking through the Bureau of Statistics census stats, and they say that in Guyana, our current population figure is 50.2%, the gender distribution, 50.2% are female. And of that figure, in terms of young women, the youth population of that is just over 30%. The conversation that we're having today, of course, as we've heard, is not just an important conversation, it's a necessary conversation, particularly because a large percentage of our population is not just young, but also young women. Now, why young women? Young women in particular, because of course we know that youth are also subject to the very same political, social, economic issues that face the wider population. So whatever is affecting the so-called adult population will also affect young people. As I mentioned, the information I want to share comes out directly out of my experience of being involved in youth leadership, not just at a local level in my church, in my local church, at a regional level, but also at an international level. One of the things I was very proud of for that board is that we advocated and actually got results, advocated for young people not to simply be tokens on the board in terms of, because they originally had a position called a youth representative on the global board. And as young people from all across the world, we advocated that that should not be so. And in fact, young people should be members of the board, fully fledged, outright part of that decision making. And I was very happy about that. But by the time I had left in 2012, we had moved from youth representation to full-fledged youth participation in the board. So coming out of that experience, there are 3 keys, I believe, for the inclusion and involvement of young women in decision making. First, we need to set the right foundation. part of the reason I believe why I was able to be involved in decision making at that level is because right from the very beginning, as a young person, I was being given those opportunities locally and in my church. And I believe that for young people, it's the same. We need to not just wait. Oftentimes when we talk about decision making, the training and the capacity building begins when young people are adolescents, teenagers are moving into young adulthood. And in fact, we need to begin age-appropriate leadership capacity building at a very young age so that that sets the stage for decision making in the future. And this is decision making about everything from your body to your education to your health, anything that affects you. Secondly, we also need to create the right conditions and the right atmosphere for that to be done. We've heard some of that through Norwell's presentation, and this just comes down to capacity building. My participation in the board, for example, was not based on the fact that I was young or that I was a woman, but it was recognition of the fact that I had capacity, gifts, and talents. And I believe as young people, that is how we need to be engaging with those who are in leadership, that it is based not simply on the fact that we are young, we have youthful energy, but that we have actual capacity, gifts, and talents that need to be developed to be a part of that decision making. And as I was mentioning earlier, thirdly, we need to bust some of the myths we have about gender and about youth. Like I said earlier, the first myth is this one, that youths are the future. We've heard that, I'm sure my mother probably heard that long before. And the reality is we predict the future by present action. So if young people aren't being empowered now to be part of whether it's the political decision making at the highest level or the local level, they're not going to be empowered to participate in those decision making structures into adulthood. They'll either become pawns or passive, if that is how we are preparing them now. We also, at a very young age, instill in young women that there are certain gender roles and expectations. For example, that one of the common ones is that men have the ability to lead and women do not. Women have to be trained in order to lead. I think Dr. Heifel has so rightly and so boldly lifted up for us some examples that show that in fact at a young age she gave the example of Janet Jagan, who is already participating in leadership and decision making. So a big part of the inclusion of young women has to be, again, at age-appropriate, through age-appropriate discussions, us busting some of these gender myths. But I want to say this, busting the gender myth is not about creating, in my mind, a division between women and men. It is about ensuring collaboration and active participation. That's my understanding of busting the gender myth. But gender in particular, because gender has nothing to do with whether you're male or female, it has everything to do with the roles and expectations that we create. And we have to empower young women to understand that they're equal collaborators and partners in leadership. Whether it is leadership in the home, leadership in the community, leadership in the workplace, or leadership at the highest levels in Parliament. But I want to end this on a real celebratory note. And I think I was particularly inspired, I didn't have this in my notes for the presentation, but particularly inspired by Dr. Eifel's presentation, because one of the things I wrote on my notepad was female Guyanese question marks. And then of course she mentioned Janet Jagan, and I was very happy, so I said, okay, you have to ask her that question. But I want to ask, how many of you in the room know or have heard of Ayana Seals? By show of hands. Okay, that's pretty good, but still alarming because 3/4 of the room does not know who Ayana Seals is. Ayana Seals, I'm raising her story in particular because she is young, she is female, and she's Guyanese. Ayana Seals, for the last year, she's one of Guyana's, I would say, contemporary youth scholars. Was part of the Commonwealth, won an internship. She first won a scholarship, then won a Commonwealth internship. Chose to return to Guyana. She's a journalist by profession, and for the past year has been writing some of the most scholarly, outstanding reflections on the political, social, and economic realities of Guyana. Dr. Eiffel was encouraging us to read. If you have not read, this was a column that came, I think, weekly in the Stabbert News. If you have not read any of Ayana's work, I encourage you to read her work. The only sad part of the story so far is that Ayana, after a year of writing, has resolved not to write anymore. Partly because we know the struggles of activism in Guyana currently. But the last column that she wrote, she ended with the words exactly the historical reflection that Dr. Eiffel gives. She encourages us to be in a spirit of resistance. And she wrote those words 3 times. Resist, resist, resist. So I want to encourage particularly the young women in the room, since I've been asked to speak about young women decision making, that I'm encouraging you to not see yourselves as limited by your gender or by your sex or whatever expectations are being placed on you about the nature of your role in society. You have an active and an equal role to play. You need to take responsibility then for if they're not being given to you, to find the right foundation for yourself in leadership, the right conditions for yourself in leadership, and by that, proving that in fact, the definitions that are being placed on you according to your gender do not define you and will not define you. And once again, I thank you very much. I think I just went over more than 5 minutes, but I want you to encourage you to please find Ayana's articles. You can look, she has a blog called For the Record, and I can assure you it will make for inspired reading. Thank you.